Welcome to another episode of ExecuBalance. Thank you for joining me today as we dig in and try to find different tips and tricks from some busy executives on how they balance their life. My name's Chad Crowe. I'm the host of the podcast as well as CEO of techwood.digital. I'm a father of 4 and a husband to 1, and so I know what it's like to have to struggle to find balance. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I'm excited to have Rich Gritter, the Director of Development for Bethany Christian Services, right?
That's right. Yep, you got it.
Awesome. So I think, first off, before we really get to know you, it might be good to kind of know what exactly is Bethany Christian Services.
Yeah, Bethany Christian Services is it's a Christian nonprofit agency that does child welfare services across the country in 33 states. And also, I believe, in 15 countries around the world. So headquartered in Grand Rapids, but we have services all over the place.
I got you. And so you're helping welfare services for children and for...
Correct. So, yeah, we've been around for 76, 77 years, and we're really known as an adoption agency. But the reality is that adoptions have declined quite a bit over the last 15 years or so. And but we're still doing a lot of foster care. We do a lot of refugee resettlement, and we're working with the kids that cross the southern border from Mexico.
So what does that look like? How is that right now?
Yeah, it's a complicated topic, and really the kids primarily come from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and in almost every case they already have a family member that is in the U.S. someplace. So if they make it across the border, the kids have to be placed with a foster family until we can find their actual family member and then verify that that's a safe home for them to be in. So they are typically, flown to one of the cities where Bethany has an agency, a branch, and the kids are placed in a foster home, and then immediately go about trying to locate their family member so that we can reunite them as soon as possible.
Awesome. I mean, it's such good work, right?
It is. It's good work. It's a little bit, some people see it as a little controversial, but we don't take any kind of a political stance on it. We just say these are kids, they're vulnerable, and they've got to be cared for. So someone's got to do it, and we're happy to be the ones to do it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So now that we know a little bit about who you work with, let's learn a little bit more about you and the roles that you play. Obviously, the role you play there, but then other roles that you feel you're juggling right now.
Sure, yeah. Aside from that, I've been with Bethany for about 20 years, but aside from that, I'm a father, and I've got 3 kids who are in their early to mid-20s and starting out their careers and their lives as young adults, and good kids, really blessed there, and have a wife. We've been married since May of 1992, so coming up on 29 years. And she's a rock. I just crazy about her, and
that's amazing.
She's a blessing to me on a daily basis. Just amazing. And then also I'm very active in my church and serve on the council there, and so that demands some of my time as well. But it's time that's it's a blessing to give that time.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So good bit of stuff going on, and so a little bit of kind of background too. Like my parents were therapeutic foster parents, so I know some of the issues and different things that I can only imagine you've seen, you've had to deal with, you've had to go through. So I can only imagine the weight that you carry around in your role at work.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the first 14 years that I worked at Bethany, I was on the program side. So then I was leading some of the programs, working in the programs, and really coming more face-to-face with the folks that we serve. And now really in the last 6 or 7 years, so much more, on the side of lining up resources so that we can run those programs. And, but in the course of, those years and kind of a long career, you do wind up accumulating some stories of families and children that really stick with you. And, I would say in the world of Bethany and the work that we do, probably the hardest job at Bethany is to be a young foster care caseworker. And, Those are the folks that often get hired right out of college. They are, given a ton of responsibility immediately, as you probably remember from your family growing up, that a foster care caseworker winds up, not only serving the family, but also being accountable to the courts for how the child is and how the parents are doing, whether reunification can actually happen. I know that there was a time when I was in college and I was an intern at Bethany doing foster care, so a long time ago. And I thought, I think they want me to play God. I really have to recommend whether this child should go back to their home now or should they stay in foster care. And I thought, who am I as a 21-year-old kid to be able to do that? So a lot of pressure for a young foster care caseworker, and that's probably the spot where a lot of turnover happens in the world of child welfare services too. So
I mean, yeah, I can only the weight that's put on those guys. They're still kids themselves, 28 years old, out of college, trying to figure it out, and you feel the weight of having somebody else's life, future, kind of in your hands. How do you make that decision when it comes down to it? How do you say, okay, well, pressure, it is what it is. If somebody has to do it, I'm going to step up and do it. How do you make that connection?
If you are, if you're working at Bethany, we really insist that a young foster care caseworker is working as part of a strong team. They've got a supervisor that really leans in and supports them through those kind of tough decisions and so forth. But, as you and I alluded to earlier, though, hard for the foster care worker, but even harder for the kids that are in foster care, right? Those kids are, they've endured the trauma of being removed from their own home. They'd like to be with their parents in many cases, even if they've suffered some neglect or abuse, and don't always fully understand why they can't be with their own parents. So, those kids are, they're in a vulnerable place, which, that's right where we want to be at Bethany, is caring for those kind of kids.
I'm a firm believer that when you can do hard things when you're not focused on yourself, right? Like, if you're looking over there at somebody else, it's easier to do hard things yourself because you're not doing it necessarily for you. You're doing it for a deeper cause. You're doing it for someone else. At Techwood, we work so hard to try to create a family culture.
Yeah.
And it's because we're not working for just me and my family. You're working for me and my family. I'm working for you and your family. You're working for so-and-so and so-and-so's family. And that mission just grows so much deeper. And then at the end of the day, it's like I'm not showing up to check a box. I'm showing up to be impactful to other people. And so I think there's just so much power in staying focused on that. And I can only imagine how many times you have to slow down and recalibrate to stay focused on the good that you guys are doing.
Certainly, yeah, and to remember exactly why you're doing it, right? Because, you often don't go into this world of caring for vulnerable kids and families because you're going to make a lot of money, right? That's just not part of the deal. But many people who do this kind of work are feeling called to it, right? They just say, I am called to seeing that children are kept safe, vulnerable children, that families can be brought back together. And so, yeah, I think it helps to step back sometimes and remember that there's a real bigger reason for why you're doing those things.
If we can too, I know it's a bit of a curveball I'm going to throw you, but it's I'm thinking back. Okay, you said you were 14 years. You've been at Bethany for 20 years.
Yep.
The first 14, you were really in that case, in that pressure cooker type position. So I'm doing the math, and I'm like, okay, so you had kids that were 10 and 12, 14 of your own, while you were also doing this. How does that juxtaposition work? How did that work for you? How did that feel? What?
Yeah, that's a great question because when you see a child that you're working with that has suffered some abuse and neglect, it's very hard to not think of your own child, right? To think of your own 6 or 8 year old and just say, how much you would do anything to protect your own child. And you think, somehow something failed that this child wasn't protected by their own family. And why was that? And how can we change that? But you're right. You see these vulnerable children through a very different lens when you're a parent yourself. So true.
Yeah, and then to flip the switch from work to home, how does that happen?
Yeah. Of course, in the world of human services, the idea of confidentiality is crucially important. So you can't really come home and talk about much of what you've seen. It's certainly not in an identifying kind of a way. But if you have someone that you really trust, like your spouse, and you can just say that, hey, this has been really hard. I saw some hard things today. Some things that'll stick with me for a long time. And in having that support of that person that's going to walk alongside you and remember why you were called to do that work, and remind you that, hey, tomorrow's probably going to be a better day, and think of the difference that you're making for that child. Those are the kind of things you keep in mind that keep you going.
And it's funny when you're running through roles, or I'm asking people about their significant other. I know it's a good relationship when they say my wife is my rock, or my my bride. Like I had one guy I interviewed, he was like, she's my bride, and no matter what he said, it was always his bride. And so when I know there's a good relationship, a deep relationship there. When, by the way, you referred to your wife earlier, what are special things, unique things that she does to help, or to have helped you during those times and helps you now, to be able to do the missional work?
I wish that I could actually just bring her on this podcast, because she's just a remarkable person. She's just very giving and loving and understanding. She gets the value in listening. She's got a very kind of authentic and genuine heart, and she's not one of those people that's kind of on a roller coaster that is really high one day and really low the next. So you can count on her, and I think that's why I use the term rock. She's just a solid person that you can always depend on.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Talk to me about your kids a little bit. I'd
Sure.
love to, what are they into? What are things that you enjoyed doing with them when they were growing up?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So my oldest is Abby, and she lives out in California and is working out there for a company that does forest preservation work out in the Bay Area and in the forests around that area. Just a smart and sharp kid. Not a kid, young lady. She's it's hard when you're a dad, And then my daughter Hannah is just finishing up in college and finishing her master's degree in speech pathology, and she is engaged and will be married in July, and so we're all very excited about that. And then my son is a senior in college, and he would love to be a high school Bible teacher, so is right now kind of looking at job opportunities around Michigan, especially the east side of the state of Michigan. So great kids. And what was the best thing about being a father to these kids is that they loved to travel the way my wife and I did. So I don't know if they ever really had a choice, because we dragged them all over the place and went to the national parks, but we just accumulated so many good memories of national park trips. And it's something that we treasure to this day. And in my career, in asking people about their childhood and what their childhood was like, one of the very first things they always talk about is family trips. So I always tell people, I said, don't cut corners on that. Even if you can't afford to do a great big trip, make sure you go camping with your kids and build memories like that. For some reason, kids remember those things. So
that's good advice. Prioritize that for sure.
Yeah, all the cliches apply about, time going so quickly and so forth. And, the reality is, being with all three of my kids out of the house now, time did go very quickly. And so that's far more than a cliche. It's a truism. And so, yeah, you lose sight of that in the dailiness sometimes of being a parent. But when you're, when your kids are finally checking out and heading out of the house, and you've invested that time in them, there's no regrets. It's really a good thing.
I'd be interested to ask, and if you're open to sharing, what did you do differently as a parent after having kind of the inside knowledge of the side of, maybe how to deal with hard things for challenged kids from challenging situations to because you saw that side of it.
Sure.
What did you plan and actively do different because you saw that underbelly?
So, I think there were a couple things that my wife and I really focused on with our kids. One of those was we made sure that they loved to read, which, sure, people know that that's important. But my kids saw a trip to the library as good as going to the beach. They just loved it, and all that reading I think really paid off. But there were two qualities that we really wanted to instill in our kids and worked very hard at that. And that was we wanted them to develop confidence and compassion. And out of all the traits that you might find in a person that you can influence, if you can be good at those two things, if you can, I think, thrive in those two areas, you're going to do okay as an adult. If you're confident, you're willing to take chances and put yourself out there, and if you're compassionate and you can interact well with other people and understand where they're coming from, it turns you into a good listener. It turns you into a good, I think, marriage partner eventually. It turns you into a good employee, a good citizen. So, those are two things that we worked at really hard. And I got to tell you, Chad, that I had a kind of a fun experience several years ago before I started doing my current role. And while working at Bethany, I also had the opportunity to be a newspaper columnist for the local newspaper. And I wrote a weekly advice column, and parents would write in with questions about, hey, this is what's going on in my house. What do you think about that? And I had the challenge of not revealing too much about my kids in the course of those answers, but it always got me on a weekly basis to think through, what are the important parts of parenting kids. It made you very intentional, I would say. And it also kind of put me in touch with, what are the common things that families are struggling with in our community. And, one of the things that really hit me, I think, was that a lot of the questions had to do with kids who seem to be forced to grow up too quickly, right? There were expectations on a child to be a 14-year-old when they were really an 8-year-old, either, how they were juggling their busy schedule with school and sports, or how they were dressed, the type of media they were exposed to. I was surprised how many parents could justify for, an 8-year-old, they would say, "No, my kid's very mature. It's okay if he watches rated R movies with us on Netflix or whatever it is." And I said, "No, let your 8-year-old be an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old isn't ready for that kind of thing, and it's not healthy." So that was a pretty common theme in some of the questions I received for the column that I wrote for a while.
Oh no, I think that's amazing advice. Right? I think everybody is pushing for you to grow up.
Yeah,
faster.
Our culture just says that is hurry up and grow up. Be older as fast as you can. Until you're older, then they want you to be younger.
Right.
But
that's I think that's a role of a parent that gets forgotten. Like, your role is to keep them a kid.
Let them be a kid. Yeah, you get that.
Not just
one
let
time.
them, but I think it's even like
Make sure.
Like own it.
Yeah, insist on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. And, there were times when we didn't do that as well as we could have, but I think overall that our intentionality around that issue of, making sure our kids did things that were age appropriate and were exposed to things that were age appropriate probably paid some dividends in the end.
I think that's great. So focus on confidence and compassion.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're giving them those family experiences to give them some concrete memories to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
Let them be kids. And how are you seeing those fruits in your 20-year-old who's working in the forest or the going off to teach high schools and Bible? Like where are those things showing up?
Yeah, really for all three of them, they are compassionate, right? They are able to extend empathy to people. There seems to be, and this is my own private bias, but there seems to be kind of a deficit of empathy in our culture, and people are quick to anger and quick to judge. And I think that my kids have been able to show that they can listen, that they can understand both sides of an issue before really speaking into it. It's a challenge that I used to lay before them. I'd say to them, don't take a strong opinion on anything until you can convincingly argue both sides of that issue. And, it helps to really slow down that way and think about, I know my side pretty well, but I don't know the other side except that they're wrong. So, but what if you invest in knowing the other side well enough that you could argue it?
Facebook would be a much politer place,
wouldn't it? I know. We need a variation on Facebook that adheres to that principle. So
I love it. I think that has, I think it's applicable in so many different places, so many different ways, from social media posts to
oh my goodness,
everything. Don't take a hard stance until you can argue both sides.
Yeah, convincingly.
Yep. I think that's you're not saying don't take a stance. I mean, you're saying just don't take a hard one. Don't draw a line in the sand until you've really thought it through.
Sure. And I think, without learning some of those principles of empathy and compassion, you don't move into that territory of wanting to understand both sides of an issue. So, yeah, and like you said, that's pretty evident these days on Facebook.
Yeah. With so for Bethany Christian Services, I know organizations like yours rely on people to fill a role of philanthropy, volunteerism, and those roles. How important are having business leaders and stay-at-home moms and other people fill those roles for your organization and for the kids that you're serving?
Yeah, it's crucial, really. So, you think about the community that we're in right here, and it's a really generous community, and so there's a strong safety net around the kids that we serve and the families that are vulnerable. But that's not true in every community. Some communities really aren't that fortunate; they're not blessed that way, and so yeah, it requires, I think, a commitment on the part of the community, which means the families in the community, the churches, the businesses, to say, hey, this is our community. We are not going to let the kids fall through the cracks here. And so, yeah, that might look like volunteerism. It might look like, from time to time, writing a check to make sure that a family's needs are met. And, really, there's so much satisfaction in that. So, and I get to, of course, that's the work that I do, is encouraging people to bring their resources to bear. But it doesn't require a lot of convincing for people to recognize that there's immense blessing in sharing your resources in a way that blesses another family and keeps a kid safe, right? I just think when I talk about support for Bethany, I am inviting them into the blessing of being part of caring for kids. And it's a blessing to do that. It feels good. It feels right. So, yeah, in my role, I get to, work with some very significant donors, companies, families, and so forth. And I love that. And I love the idea of putting a proposal in front of them that they can support and that they might support in a big way. But I also love those cases where it's one child or one family, and they've got a specific need. And, I get to hear from the caseworker that, hey, this family can, if they can just have, new carpet, their apartment will be ready. And in addition to mom's hard work, getting things back together, the kids can come home from foster care. Do you know anybody that can write a check for some new carpet for their apartment? And then I get to bring that to a donor, and I know that, he's excited about that. And he says, of course, why wouldn't I do that? And then I get to go back and tell the caseworker that, guess what? We found a donor to do that. The donor the caseworker gets to tell the parent, hey, we have someone who's going to help with this. So it's just win, win, win all the way around. And I think, what more blessed work could you do than, just bring in that circle of joy around your work.
I've got a mentor who had challenged me. He said, took $1 and said, "What's the highest honor you can do with this $1? Like, what is the most? Where can you put it that you would get the most return out of it? Right?
Yeah.
It's not the stock market. It's like right. Especially if you're convicted by religious principles and you believe in God and." So he told me there's no higher power for $1 than to be in the service of God.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. And I believe that strongly too, that, if you believe that hurting children and families are made in God's image, then, the resources that you're blessed with are really God's resources, and they should be employed or deployed to help with those kids.
I would say too, there's so many hard stories out there that we hear. We don't hear enough of the good ones, and I know they're out there. Like I said, my mom and dad were therapeutic foster kids, and we had kids come through. Yeah. We had one. We had a baby. I remember when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. He came through. He was addicted to drugs when he came out of the womb.
Addicted, sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I remember the first month of just like. Of crying, and I also remember how sweet the kid was.
Yeah,
like I was a teenager. I had a heart. You holding a kid. There's a certain amount of love you can feel and sense his sweetness. And I just remember the day he got to go home.
Yeah. And you're tearing up just talking about it, and it makes me feel that way too. And for you think about a baby that's born addicted, and I'm thinking of some cases right now exactly like that, and like the child didn't do anything to ask for that, right? But in many cases, mom fell into something that she didn't intend to either, right?
100%. His mom, she got herself clean. She went to paralegal school. She became a paralegal. Yeah. She earned the right for him to come home, and we get. It's fun. My parents will every now and then I'll go home and they'll be like, "Oh, do you remember so-and-so, whatever." Well, they reached out to me the other day.
Yeah. I love that. Don't
it's
you?
It's amazing. Yeah.
You know that you had an influence on them if they remember you that way.
My mom's also a minister, and she's married two of the kids that have come through our house to their
cool.
significant others. And it's just been a very rewarding thing. And so I would say, for all the bad stories that are out there, there are good stories, and people are needed to fill those roles of donor and volunteer and foster parent. Oh my God, there's such a need for people to be willing to step up and serve in that role, and you can balance that role with your life.
You can,
because there's organizations out there to help too.
Yeah, so true. I had when I was in college, I was looking for a volunteer opportunity, and I thought, why couldn't I be a big brother? And so this was long before my career was started, but I went to a local agency that does the Big Brothers program, and I just said, I was probably a little cocky, but I said, all right, just the toughest kids you have, or one of the the hardest kids, the kid with the most need. And so they matched me up with a young man, and I invested in him, and my family really invested in him, and he had a just the deck stacked against him in ways that you can't even imagine, just based on his family and the way they, moved around. And without giving too many details, he just really didn't have a lot of advantages in life. And then the fun part was that my family, my sisters and my parents, invested in him too, and really treated him like part of our family. And so he was about 9 when we started. Late in his teen years, he got in some trouble and wound up doing some prison time. And interestingly, while he was in prison, which went 15 years, he would write me about once a year just to let me know how he was doing. And I learned that one thing he was doing was that he had a subscription to the local newspaper, and he was reading my column every week. And he would show it to people and say, I know this guy. But so the week that he got out of prison, he called me and just said, hey, I really want to get together. And so I said, of course, yeah, let's get together. And big moment. It was just so fun to see him after so long, and to catch up again. But he said, the memories that I had of spending time with your family and learning what a family was really about is what got me through those 15 years in prison. And I was like, it was so worth it investing in him. It was just so worth it. And now he called me. We talk every couple of weeks, and he's got his own family, and he works, and he's got 4 beautiful little girls, and he's a good dad, and there's just such a payoff to it. And we
amazing.
talked the other night, and he said, "Hey, I love you, man." And I thought, golly, that's the best. Love you too. So
Yeah, there's so many. I think there's so many situations that it's so tempting to write it off as a lost cause, but they're not. I mean, 15 years in prisons, but still came out. It can be an amazing contribution to society. Can have an amazing family, and
just needed one person to invest in him. Yeah. I think without one person investing in him, and of course then it was my whole family, things could have gone sideways and stayed sideways for him. But he's a good guy.
That's amazing. I think so many things to grasp a hold of and hold on to from our conversation. Have a rock in your family. Yeah. Make sure that you can have somebody to help you process things, especially from doing the hard things. Make sure you stay focused on the higher purpose. Lessons for how to be a better dad, what to teach your kids. Mm-hmm. And then I think one of the bigger takeaways is the role of a volunteer and donor is just needed roles, fulfilling roles with amazing purpose that we need people to fill.
Yep. If you're even thinking about that, we need you, and kids need you, and you can make a difference, and it's a great investment of that dollar. And so, and I'm not saying that you have to write a check to Bethany, but support the local ministry and the local program that serves kids. It's entirely worth it. It's a great investment.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your openness, and for your willingness to share. I mean, I do appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.